Hello, how are you doing? Good afternoon. Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming. Thank you for staying. My name's Ian Simons. I direct the National Videogame Arcade, which is what it says it is, really, which is the 5 floors of museum and experience in Nottingham. And for the last 10 years prior to that, I worked on a thing called the Game City Festival that we'll talk about in a second. I'm really excited to be here for a brief few hours in Edinburgh during the most exciting time of the year to be in Edinburgh. I'll go back today, so it's really frustrating, but really exciting to be here just for a few hours, and it's brilliant to be at this festival. So what I wanted to talk to you about today is to some extent the kind of future of video games. This isn't really going to be a tech talk. In some respects, I'm going to apologize to Tom a little bit in advance because he's sort of ragging on tech talks a little bit as things as being the future of it, but it's all done in the nicest possible way. So my background, just to give you a sense of it, is in music and is in theatre, and I'm a kind of humanities-like nerd who came into video games via video games being a meeting point of all of those things. And what I wanted to talk to you about today is video games as a place for new kinds of creativity, for new kinds of people making new kinds of work. So the future of video games, I want to talk to you about tools a little bit. I want to talk to you about kind of vocabulary, and this idea about the future. Because the thing about games is we do a lot of work with the Science Museum on the National Videogame Arcade, which you might have heard of, and this whole idea of digital preservation and preserving what games were and what they could be. And the thing about games is they kind of eat themselves. So like the games industry kind of eats itself. So the best game is always the next game. So you've probably all got PS4s, right? Can't wait for the PS5, right? You get Xbox One, this is a bad example, Xbox 2. But this sense of the next thing always being the best thing, and this kind of like self-superseding thing that's baked into the business model of what games are that makes it difficult to kind of take a moment to pause with games. It makes them really, really exciting and really, really kind of like the Wild West, but it makes it difficult sometimes to take a kind of moment and let them kind of get a kind of cultural confidence, which they've maybe kind of lacked over the last sort of 30 years. So that's one of the things I want to talk to you about today. But what I thought I'd start off by doing is give you a brief kind of origin story. Is that all right? I'm going to play this like it's a room with 400 people in it, all right? So you're going to stay with me for this, right? So there's going to be music, there's going to be laughter, and there's going to be tears. This genuinely is going to be tears, all right? So this is a good time to get relaxed with each other, embrace yourselves for the kind of emotional depth that you didn't want at 3 o'clock on a Monday afternoon. It's going to be difficult. Are many people here Scottish? Right, it's going to be hard for you to relate to this, but I come from the British Midlands, where we have no sense of cultural self-identity. We don't really feel like we're kind of from here. I'm from a town called Cannock, which is right. Is anybody here from Cannock? I should have checked that before I said this. No, he's from Cannock. Okay, right. So, Cannock is a small village about, it's not a small village, but it's a town about 10 miles north of Birmingham. When I was a teenager in Cannock, I thought I was going to be a musician. I only ever wanted to be a musician. So what I ever wanted to do was work in music. So that's all I did. So I listened to Dylan, and I listened to the Animals, and I listened to the Beatles, and the Stones, and the Who, and Pink Floyd. And when I was I guess about 9 or 10, my parents bought me a clarinet. Clarinets are cool, right? You can say, if you want to say clarinets are cool, you can't say it. You can't say it because it's not true. Clarinets aren't cool. Clarinets aren't cool at all. So that was a kind of devastating moment for me, because clarinets as a kind of on-ramp into music are quite difficult things. Don't fade them. We've got to keep the Animals. We're going to lose the mood if we keep the music down, though. If we keep the soundtrack up a little bit. So you see this is a young girl playing the violin. Hang on, where is she? Oh no, it's gone all the way back. Don't use iPads to present. This is the lesson that we're learning together right now. Hang on, let's get to this girl with a violin. I'm going to show you a picture of this girl with a violin. There you go. Now, the reason this is a picture and not a piece of video is that sounds terrible. Sounds absolutely terrible. What we'd often do in the 80s, which is where I grew up, is we would give children things like clarinets and violins, quite difficult instruments to get anything that sounds pleasing out of very, very quickly. They kind of fight you. They're quite hard to get going. It's hard to get much back from a violin, right? So she sounds terrible. And what you can often end up with, I ended up with this kind of scenario where a child has been given an on-ramp into music, which I love. And it can feel like this. That's not me. It can feel like this. So when we introduce particularly young people, but anyone who loves something into what it could be, we have to be really careful what those first moments could be. So when I got a little bit older, I was old enough to get a job. My first job was at the drive-thru McDonald's on the Ring Road in Canada, one of the first drive-thrus, and saved up and bought a guitar. And the dad of a friend taught me music, taught me chords, and then you can do things like, you suddenly realize that you can look at things like Beatles songbooks and see what the music that you listen to, the music that you love, is put together out of the same component pieces, the same systems that are starting to fall underneath your fingers. So this education wasn't kind of about virtuosity, but about systems, about the fact that the systems that put together Sergeant Pepper were the same systems that put you learning in your kind of bedroom. You could learn this by yourself, for the map's kind of there. And then you learned about things like the circle of fifths, and before you know it, you realize like how pop music works, which is what you really want to know, and you could put the clarinet away forever, but you've got some sense of an on-ramp of a kind of cultural and creative vocabulary. So this is going to be pertinent to what I want to talk about today, I promise. So games are made by people, right? That's kind of my story, how I got to this point. And this is a thing that has always kind of been lost a lot, I think. It was really, really true in the kind of 80s. We'll look at an example of that in a second. But when we started making the festival that we're working at the moment, I wrote about video games for a while as a journalist and kind of books. And the thing that always really, really surprised me, and it's a really childishly simplistic point, is that in any other creative industry, like you know who George Martin was, right? You know who the guys in the band were, the girls in the band, you know who wrote your favorite book, you know who directed your favorite book, you might even know who wrote the screenplay. But with a few exceptions, you probably don't know who made your favorite game, probably, in terms of the mainstream. And this always seemed to me to be like crazy, absolutely insane. And I'm not talking about celebrity here. I'm not sure. Let's not confuse this with the idea of we need rock stars. I'm just talking about like basic human presence, right? Which is arguably one of the most important things when we're talking about art, culture, even not even necessarily art, is that there are like fingerprints. You can feel the fingerprints on the thing that you're playing. It's so important. So our work on the festival and everything we've done since has been about kind of celebrating and exposing in a nice way this fact that games are made by people. I don't mean that profoundly. I don't mean that in some kind of like extraordinary kind of Zen way. I just mean really simplistically. If we are going to participate, games are going to participate in culture at all, they need to be like present. There needs to be a humanity in those present. If games are going to be trusted by other people, by parents, right? It's important that they have like some kind of face. And also, if games are going to inspire people to want to make games, they're going to you want to hear Tom talk about VR, right? And think, I could do that. That's inspiration. I could kind of do that. And this is a really like simple, and it's much better now than it was. But it was a thing that kind of underpinned a lot of our work. And this wasn't always the case. Some of you might be familiar with this advert from the early 80s. Anybody seen this before? So this is a double-page spread from a computing magazine called We See Father. And these are short biographies and photographs of developers for the launch of a company called Electronic Arts. So there was a moment in video games, and we understand why it kind of got unpicked and why it changed, but there was a moment in video games where there was like an authorial kind of presence, like a human presence in what they would be. And that was celebrated. And that's a really, really important kind of moment that I feel that we've lost. So games are made by people. So I'm going to show you really, really quickly what we do, and then I want to talk about what this is mostly about. So we run a festival called Game City, and it was premised on this idea, like 11 years ago now, 10 years ago, that anyone should be able to play video games, right? So when we started, it was 2006. It was just, the Wii was just about to come out. Nobody had iPhones. Girls didn't really play video games. Neither did families. Like SingStar was just starting to kind of be a thing. The last decade in video games has been really, really transformative in terms of the kind of diversity of what they've been. But even if you just like wind back 10 years, things are a little bit kind of different. So I'm going to talk over this, just to give you a sort of sense of our kind of approach. So this is like an out-of-date show of the kinds of things that we've done. So we're an arts festival about video games. So we celebrate the people that make them. We invite them to come and talk about their work. We kind of explode them into their constituent pieces. So they're about gigs, and they're about workshops, and they're about playing to some extent. And they're about developers kind of being present and showing how things are made. And they're about, again, kind of celebrating this fact that video games are like the most derivative art form that there is. And I mean that really positively, in that they're made of animation, and they're made of choreography, and they're made of music, and they're made of writing, and they're made of maths, and they're made of fashion, and they're made of all of these things. So what we tried to do with Game City was make a multi-venue, serendipitous festival that treated games as things that weren't like primarily kind of mediated by screens, if that makes sense. Like, how do you excite people about video games without just putting them in front of a screen? This is a kind of key point that I want to talk about as we go on to talk about the MVA. You'll notice, like, we're trying to do the opposite of the biggest hall we could find with, like, all the computers we could find. And we're trying to invite different people into this kind of celebration of what games could be. So we've arranged in collaboration a good bunch of kind of stupid things over the years, putting things like Eric Chahi together with like a chef to create playable meals. We've done things with, that was Adam Saltzman, the Cannibal Overland developer, making a game in a day. This is Masai Matsura, who came over and did a kind of gig lecture. Then they all did Hey Jude, the end. You're right to fade that up. I would have faded that up as well. So you get the general idea. Stuff about video games across different locations, and it was predominantly about how games were made and inviting different people to play them. And it's this idea that started to kind of bubble up that games are things that are made. So if you're a person in the world, like experiencing video games, it's not apparent. This kind of follows on from the kind of point about them made by people. That games are even like made at all. Most people's experience of a video game 10 years ago would have been the thing that they got shrink wrapped in, like in Game Station or Game or Electronics Boutique, as it might have been then. It's different now because we'll be downloading them and they're less physical. But our first experience of them would have been as complete, finished things. And what we tend to lose is this sense of kind of process. And I've always been like much more interested in kind of sketchbooks and the journey, like to things that are amazing rather than necessarily the things themselves. And again, that's the thing that's often hidden away in video games. They're not like made by wizards. Again, they're kind of made by people, and they are things that are made, and there's a state before they are completed at which they can be experienced too. What's really interesting and really exciting now is things like early access on Steam, and the ability to participate and witness this kind of journey is something that's been like relatively recent. But again, over the last decade, that's not been something that's been very kind of present. So we got 10 years of this, 9 years into this festival, and then thought, we need to kind of do something with it. We need to take it to another kind of place. And our idea was we would create a building, which is what we did a year and a half ago, National Videogame Arcade. And that idea was everyone should be able to play games, but most importantly, and this is what I want to talk to you about today, that anyone should be able to make games. Anyone should be able to make games. Anyone should be able to make games, right? And that was the idea that kind of underpinned how we designed, how we created the MVA. So the people that work at the MVA are the people that made it, and we tried to design it quite transparently. So the software engineers, the hardware engineers, all the kind of crew there are there present in the building whilst it works. And the building breaks, right? Because computers and screens and stuff. And we tried to make it as transparent as possible, trying to conceive of the building as being a platform so that you can change it and you can collaborate in the changing of it with the people that are kind of there. So not only is the MBA built by people, but do you want to help us continue building it? Is the kind of implicit invitation that we make. So, so in those kind of school trips that we do, they're about how some of the exhibits were made. In the kind of day-to-day kind of after-school clubs and old people's kind of coding and design clubs, it's all kind of anchored back to this idea that you could improve this thing that you're actually sat in. It's this idea of you having some kind of agency in this place to change it. Does that make sense? Again, like these are all like, I'm saying this like it's a manifesto and it's written, like it's really not. The embodiment of this really is like a bunch of people having fun, not some like specky guy going like this. And we try and make this kind of palatable as possible, but I guess I'm sort of telegraphing it for you today. So we're in the middle of Nottingham. We're like 5 floors. We work with Nottingham Trent University, we work at Fetch College. People come to visit. And we are now just under 30 people who staff and create this building. Okay, so one of the things you get asked a lot, if you're the director of National Videogame Arcade, is what is the future of video games? What's the future of video games? I'm going to discover that right now. Excited? Yeah? Yeah, right? Okay, the future of video games. So there's 3 kind of alternative futures of video games you might have been offered in the last few years. So the top left, Connect. No love for Connect left in the room at all. So Connect was the future of video games at one moment not that long ago. Top right, 3D televisions. No. 3D televisions were at some point were also the future of video games and entertainment. And at the bottom, virtual reality. Yeah, which I mean, in all honesty, actually is the future of video games. That's kind of fine. But there are these 3 kind of competing kind of means, competing moments, even from the last kind of 5 or 6 years, which for their time have been about what video games are actually going to be and what the future is. Now, one of the kind of discourses that went alongside technology in around 2004-05 was this idea of video games like being art or not. We're not going to talk about that today. It's all right, don't worry. They are, in case you're wondering, or they're not. It doesn't matter. Are video games art or not? Now, does anybody know who said this quote? I think the real indicator of whether games be art or not is when somebody confesses that they cried at level 17. Anybody know who said that in 2004? He's already been mentioned today. Good, I thought you'd all go, I know who it is. That's good. It's good news for me. No? Steven Spielberg. Steven Spielberg quote from 2004. Who said, will games be art? Will they be a mature art form? Well, I think the real indicator will be when somebody confesses that they cried at level 17. Right. So on the one hand, that's really useful. It's a very useful quote. There's a lot bound up in that, right, that we can unpick. It's a really helpful thing for him to have said. But it presupposes these 2 kind of things, right? The first of all, that crying is like some sort of apex of complexity of emotion that we should all be kind of seeking to reach, because that's like where it's at. If you can cry, that's the most difficult thing to do. It's like it's not. And secondly, it introduced, and this is around the time that HD TVs were coming out and we're all about to get 360s, this idea of photorealism, of this parallel track, the movies and video games are on together, that like in order for us to experience the performance, the narrativization of an emotion, we need to see something that looks real, need something that looks photoreal. People familiar with this like idea? Because games are going to look like movies soon, and they'll be indistinguishable from, from the actors that you see, from Meryl Streep, right? From the actors that you'll see like emoting in films. And for a long time, the kind of HD moment in games was tethered to this idea of emotion needing to be photorealistic. Like the graphics chip was called the emotion engine in the PlayStation. It was called the emotion engine. So what you would end up with then is things like this. So some of you may have seen this clip. this is a demo clip I'm going to show you quickly from a studio called Quantic Dream, a French studio that made a game called Heavy Rain and Beyond most recently. The piece is called The Audition, and they work in kind of non-linear interactive movie kind of form, and it's very much about demonstrating the emotional weight, like gravity, that can be achieved in real time on a PS3. Can you fade this up, please?
And then my whole world falls apart. I come home and I cry for hours in my kitchen. I get the gun from the drawer in the bedroom, and I tell myself that if this is all that life has to offer me, then I can do without. But then I change my mind. After all, I'm not the one who's cheating. So, quietly, I wait for you to come home, sitting in my average little kitchen.
So, it kind of reinforces and it zooms in on the tear. It reinforces this idea that there's something kind of verite, photoreal, like really, that's a short extra, kind of beautiful performance, that kind of high definition is necessary to create that kind of emotional impact, right? Now that is not true. That is just not true. So we don't need photorealism in order to be made to cry. That's kind of shortcut. I'm going to demonstrate that now with this exhibit.
Bambi, come here. Look. New spring grass. Bambi, quick, the thicket! Faster! Faster, Bambi! Don't look back! Keep running! Keep running!
We made it! We made it, Mother! 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 Mother, where are you?
I'm going to have to stop it there, sorry. Oh, it's all right. Just need a minute. So like some degrees of photorealism less than photoreal, but at least for some of us, right, like extraordinarily moving. So this idea that technology per se, that the advance of technology is inextricably tethered to the advance of like emotional fidelity in video games is something we need to not just accept that, we need to kind of pick at that idea, right? So this it's difficult to recover from that, isn't it? You're right. We should have had like a funny slide straight afterwards, but we don't. That's what we're going to do. We're going to push ahead. So this was the idea that the MVA was kind of underpinned with. This idea that in order to move the language of video games along, in order to develop this vocabulary, we can actually decouple it from necessarily the cutting edge of technology. That there are tools and there are techniques and there are forms available to us, to kind of all of us, that can allow anyone to begin to make video games. Because there has never been a more exciting and better time to make video games. And once we start to kind of decouple this idea of a future from something that's absolutely anchored technology, that means that different people would be able to make video games. And this is where things get really interesting, really, really interesting for me. So as we make the tools that are needed to create video games, kinds of video games more accessible, different people, right, can kind of begin to pick them up. And this kind of on-ramp, it's almost like it makes sense, that stuff at the beginning about the violin, doesn't it, almost? That kind of on-ramp becomes something that's kind of shallow and invite people into virtuosity through something that is that gives them kind of more immediate kind of feedback. And this isn't just a kind of wish, really. I think this is really, really vital for the future of video games as culture. And it really helps parents. So most of the people that come to the MVA are kind of families, and they're kind of mums and dads with their kids, and they're trying to find out, what do they, like he or she just really loves Minecraft or Terraria. What do we do with this boundless energy that they have, this boundless attention that they have for this thing? I don't really get it. I'm on the back foot. How can you help me? If he was into football, he could join a football club. He could join an orchestra if he liked music, but he likes games. What do I do with this energy in my child? Helping them be shown a pathway to creativity helps them, I think, kind of encourage different voices into making work. And it's so kind of important. And to do that, we need tools. So in the early 80s, like the accessibility of VHS camcorders really transformed American independent cinema. So the idea that like relatively accessible domestic tools were put in the hands of kids, like gave rise to Steven Soderbergh's, gave rise to Tarantino's, gave rise to this whole kind of Miramax movement of people being able to make work. So similarly, 4-track recording, like domestic 4-track recording, created producers, created engineers, created songwriters in the kind of bedrooms of the world through these kind of technologies becoming more and more accessible. Like the availability of cheap musical instruments put in the right hands means that different kinds of songs can get written with those tools. And ideas can get created, and movements can get started, and these tools can create different kinds of kind of meaning, which is not for a second to decry shooting Space Marines, right? I love shooting Space Marines. This doesn't mean, this is not a threat to our right to shoot Space Marines. But I really mean that. I don't mean that glibly, because it's important. It's an important part of the grammar of what games are, right? But we have to start to help to tease apart the breadth and the vocabulary of what they could be, and get out of this place of the games industry generically being as kind of conservative as it sometimes can be. But this is changing. So there's never been this better place for games to do this, and they really are at this point now, I think. So this on-ramp. So in the past few years, there's been a real emphasis towards STEM. People familiar with this, STEM education? Stay with me, guys. STEM education, right? Yeah, science, technology, engineering, maths, and literature and hope review. And this idea that computer science is necessarily the kind of gateway to video game creativity. And that's true, right? That's true to a point. But to me, computer science and the kind of shorthand of things like the Raspberry Pi that came along with it can feel a bit like this. Feel a bit like this again. Code is really important. Code is absolutely the kind of grammar of how video games are created. But I think we've fallen into a language of code being like the new Latin, or the only potential gateway that I think kind of excludes a lot of the potential voices into creating video games that are so essential to trying to kind of tease this thing open. Does that make sense? I think we've also got to create entry points to video games that can give different kinds of people something back quicker in order to enable them to make things. So I'm not contesting that artists can't code or coders can't do art. I'm not saying this from a divisive point of view. I'm talking about a rebalancing here, not a tearing down. It's like this is hopefully a kind of subtle point, rather than a kind of sledgehammer. Because it's that point at the beginning where we very first encounter the tools that's the most fragile. And you could either get bought a clarinet, what happened to me, right? Or something that will give you, or a ukulele, or something that will give you something back quicker, to allow you to take that journey to kind of further into, let you lean in, to let you get to that point of virtuosity. So the actual future of video games, that was just a rehearsal last time, I think is this. Because tools now, the tools to create games are accessible and free in a way that they have really never ever been before. So any one of you now, right now, you might even be doing it as I speak, can go out and download Twine, or download RenPy, or GameMaker, or Scratch, or Unity, and begin to make new work and share new work. And the education around video games and the literacy around video games, what they are, at the school level, needs to join up with the availability of these tools at the point of design. So not abstracting this to code, but at the point of meaning, at the point of feelings. So when I was a kid in a band and I split up with my girlfriend, I'd write a song, because I was that kind of kid, right? It's completely conceivable that you'd write a video game now. The emotional kind of language, given the right people entering this form, can kind of evolve to a point where these are expressive forms. This isn't like a weird outlier thing now. This is becoming naturalized, and it's a really exciting kind of moment. So what do we do? So I want to sound that bleak. The really exciting thing is that this really is happening now, and our responsibility as curators, I don't know how many of you run museums or festivals or arcades or those sort of things in the room, is to make sure that the kind of consciousness of this stuff trickles down to people who might actually want to make work. And that's not just about putting the games in front of people and hoping that they kind of get them and they like them, but actually trying to curate and create a kind of scene and a moment and a sum of all these things. Because there's so much interesting work happening right now in the world. And we need to connect those up with games education, with games literacy, because it's not just enough to know like how games are made, right? We need to know like why games are being, like why bother make a game? There's people in here who make games. Why are you bothering? Like, what's the point? You know, right? You know why you're driven to make things, but we need to be able to articulate that and trickle that down to inspire in a different way different people to make games. And we talk about diversity there, and I mean that, you know, I mean that in an inclusive, if you like, kind of manifesto sense. But I also mean that in a like a self-interested, make things less boring sense. Make games less boring. Invite new people in to make games, to just make them not boring. So one of the things that we do in the MVA is show unfinished games. It's sort of an increasing bit of our galleries now is stuff that's not finished. So things like World is Flat is at the moment. I'll show you a bunch of these on the kind of screen. And it's a really important and kind of interesting part of the galleries, more so than we ever thought, right? Because you see stuff that's a bit broken, or it's like too slow, or it's too fast, or it's too blue, or whatever it might be. But the equivalent of those sketchbooks of process of showing people that games are made and literally being made. And then you can kind of come back and see the same thing in a few weeks, and it's different, and maybe it's different because of an opinion that you had. And developers will kind of come and visit the MVA and talk about the work with the people whilst they're there. And you get to like see inside the kitchen of games being made, which just isn't a privilege that people tend to get very often. And again, it's so easy. This isn't rocket science. It's such an easy kind of humanizing thing to do, and it just makes such a difference. And in doing that, in contextualizing new independent games alongside fantastic AAA work, we start to kind of normalize what games, the diversity of what they could be, and increase the kind of diet, right, the potential diet of what people could play. So one of the things we then invite people to do is fill in postcards to send to the developers with their feedback on the games, which when they're not there, which they seem to really enjoy. All right, so I'm going to wrap up. So here's my summary point. So you all need to start making video games if you're not already immediately. We need to start learning about what they are, how they work, and how they're made. Right? They need to be taught in schools, but not just in computer science, but in humanities. In humanities subjects too. Like, what are video games? Why are video games? Creative, putting them alongside creative writing rather than alongside code. Right? We can't kind of continue with this sort of artificial separation, because these occupy the greatest mind share in terms of time of like any media that's happening on the planet right now by thousands of %, right? And yet they're barely acknowledged as cultural objects in the curriculum. And the STEM agenda does not speak to that. It doesn't confront that. It's really important. People aren't consuming video games because they really like STEM. They're doing it because they love them, What is that like? What does that mean? How do we teach around that? What do we do with that kind of energy? We need playing lists as well as reading lists. We need to acknowledge and confront the fact that this form isn't going away, and it's not going to destroy any of the existing literacies in school. It's absolutely there to complement them, because video games are completely derivative. They're completely derivative. They're the sum of, it's why they're so exciting. They're the sum of everything that came before them. Their music and their art and their dance and their architecture and their code. They're not a minus. Video games are the sum of everything that kind of came before. And they're so unstable, and they're so, they're kind of exciting because of that. So we can absolutely choose to have new games. We can choose to have better games. So I'm going to end with a brief call for diversity then, because this really is, for me, it's about diversity. It's about putting tools in the hands of different kinds of people. More than anything else, it really is about just not being bored, because my future boredom is at stake here.
Unknown. Unidentified settlement ships. You are moving into restricted.
So as I said earlier on,
Fire. We're fucking fire. Native guns are attacking our airship. Pilot hit.
This is a full-blown invasion.
Oh my god.
so I do like games with men with guns. I genuinely do. They're really important. I like the thrill of shooting other men or aliens, whatever. I like the transgressive thrill of violence. I absolutely do want to kill. I do. But I also really want something a bit more. I want to do everything we can to encourage it. So I would like different games, please, about different things made by different people, because the future of video games will not be delivered solely by technology, nor will it be delivered by a middle-class white man from Cannock. The future of video games more likely is to be delivered by an 11-year-old girl from Edinburgh. The tools are absolutely there now to create them. We just need to push them out into the right hands as soon as possible. We can't, again, just continue asking how we make games. We've got to be confident enough, culturally confident enough, to ask, like, why are we making games, and be able to answer that question. So yeah, future of games, right? All we have to do is just literally just make it up. Thank you very much. Have you got any things to throw, or questions, or comments, or I'll stop talking now. Should have ended on. It's a difficult time in ending, I thought. Sorry, please.
I thought that was fantastic, thank you. I agree very much in terms of the accessibility of things, and being able to kind of leapfrog that early stages, like you say, with the Raspberry Pi being, it's very cool, but you're still a very long way off from actually producing anything like that. Is there anything out there at the moment that you're using or that's available for children that kind of lets them leapfrog those coding stages so they can actually start getting into the nitty-gritty of actually producing something?
The stuff we found to be best, so other than so things like Scratch, which they looked at in school, is Twine. Are people familiar with Twine? No. So Twine is a free, non-linear narrative, like story creating tool. So like immediately, within minutes, you're able to understand the structure of stories, the structure of kind of non-linear choices. But really importantly, you're into a story immediately. So as well as getting that understanding, people are also like dragons or whatever, or fighting, or car chases, or explosions, or whatever it might be. So there's a kind of immediate payback in that. The nice thing that Twine does then, I think, and we've done a lot of work with the kind of libraries in Nottinghamshire around this, is you can stop at that point, right, and make choose your own adventures, like effectively. With like a bit more, you can start to create persistent variables between scenes. So one scene's got a red door in it, and this scene's got a red key in it, and you can pick it up over here, and you can carry it with you and start to track, really gently start to persistently track variables across the story. And they've been carrying around you kind of into inventory management and those sort of things. So it really gently takes people through the lens of stories into what quite rapidly, if they want to, kind of becomes code. So we've had a lot of fun with that, a lot of success with that. And Scratch and Game Maker as well has worked really well for us. A lot of the challenges we find at work is around like how long you've got. So things like Twine, when we used to do that like on a Saturday morning, so you do like 6 weeks, and everyone would come back and they'd move the thing on, and the stories moved on, and there's like a relationship and a persistence, I guess, grows within the groups. It's when you've got like 90 minutes on a school trip, that's a lot harder, I think. Having something that they can take away that's executable or downloadable at home is really, really key as well. So with Twine, you can either compile it or it stores it on the server. You can download it or email it to them. Having that thing to take home and show, kind of do, is really, really like it's worth a lot, right? Yeah. So everyone should use Twine, basically. I think if it's hey.
Hi, I'm Tony. I'm an indie developer. You actually had my game at the MVA's greenhouse earlier in there.
Oh,
so
cool.
Thanks very much for that.
Thank you.
I was wondering if so there's like a problem kind of with almost archival of old games, like there's some like online games that you simply can't play anymore. I was wondering if you thought that affected like the mediums, the way, like whether the medium is taken seriously as a kind of art form, and if so, sort of how we would work around that, and how can we fix that, basically? Yeah.
So as I alluded at the beginning, we also did a lot of work setting up the National Videogame Arcade with the Science Museum. So there are a few like fundamental legal barriers before we even get onto the technical barriers around archiving video games. Like there's no legal deposit. People know what that is. So every time anyone publishes a book or a magazine, you have to give a copy of the British Library. You don't have to do that for video games. It's just like it's the Wild West, you know. And even if you did, which version would you give them? And there's obviously massive questions around MMOs and all that sort of stuff. So to be honest with you, we sort of looked away from that a bit because it's just too hard and it's too expensive, and like, you know, I'm 42, I can't, you know what I mean? You've got to pick your battles. So what we started to look at as an answer to that, though, was trying to answer the question of, like, how do you explain what Tomb Raider is, right, without having to play Tomb Raider, right? So if the purpose of preservation is to be able to play the original game on the original hardware, like that is simply not going to be possible. Like, I mean, it literally can't be, because PlayStation is made of plastic, right? And they're going to disappear. It's all going to disappear. It's all going to die. It's all going to disappear. So in the face of that, like, how do you capture that original experience? So we started to look much more at things like documentaries of playing. So interesting is like parallel with the kind of Let's Play, like a slightly, I guess, sort of more critical sort of Let's Play work that we do, and archival footage and talking to makers and making that stuff as accessible as possible. Without necessarily like needing or forcing the person to play it. Because that's the real problem with things like MVAs, right? And you see it with the Game On show, or anyone who's ever tried to exhibit a video game in public. Like, they're not good places to play video games. You want to play video games at home. Like, of course you do, because like crisps and, you know, family and stuff. Why would you want to go to gallery play video games? They're rubbish. So what can you do that's additive to that, that's different? Well, you can interpret. You know, it's not enough to put a game in a room. We put games in rooms. We don't have the answers, but there are some of the kind of parts that we try and confront that. Because if we're going to try and explain to a visitor what Final Fantasy is, right, and an experience that's hundreds of hours long, which hour are we going to show them? And your experience will be different to mine anyway, you know? So you can't do that. So we kind of accept you can't do that, so we need to look at alternative approaches. So we've looked at things like, I was talking about the game inspectors, which some of the guys at Bone Loaf helped us make a Gang-based one. So trying to deconstruct kind of X-ray, if you like, conceptually kind of what a game might be, and just look at kind of bit of it, so that we can show you like the ability to zoom out of a Sonic level, right? So this is making effectively a little app using the kind of bitmap, letting you fly through the Sonic level without playing Sonic. Because everyone's trying to explain to you what's interesting about the Green Hill Zone. I could hand you a controller and hope that you're good at Sonic, but you might not be, and you might have never even seen a controller before. And what's a Sonic? Or we can try and empower people to kind of explore game worlds and what games are in different ways other than playing. Because playing's really hard. Like, it's quite hard to do. We can all like sit down and watch Citizen Kane together and all have basically the same, we know we're watching the same thing, but we're all going to have different experiences of whatever it is we're playing. And that's a non-trivial problem. I've lost track of the original question. I'm really sorry. I think I just went off on some stuff about preservation. So it's really important, I think, is the answer. But for us, it's about interpretation rather than necessarily preservation. Does that make sense? Like, there's a whole load of people working on the problem you're talking about around emulation and digital preservation, but it's too hard for me, honestly. It's like, they're really clever, but even just the law around it is nuts. Thank you. Thank you for putting your game in that place. Hey.
Someone speaking tomorrow is a guy called William Huber, who's the director of the Centre of Excellence for Games at Aberdeen University.
Yes.
He makes exactly the same point you've just made about stopping seeing gaming as part of a computer science curriculum, see it as part of the humanities as a cultural product.
Fantastic.
How do we achieve that? My background, I've sat on committees in Wales looking at how you introduce ICT into the curriculum, for instance. And that's been achieved. So essentially the curriculum, but how do we move it, the emphasis from being to computer science and into sort of content creation around humanity?
Yeah. So I think the first step is we need to look at and talk about the games that people are actually playing. So a lot of the problem with the discourse around games literacy and the understanding of game systems is it gets hijacked by the kind of ed tech community. So you end up with like maths invaders, you know, the sorts of things we used to have when I was a kid. Nobody wants to play the. People are less likely to want to play the game. Like if you begin to talk to a kid about Terraria, or most obviously Minecraft, we need to talk something other than Minecraft, probably some other go-to games. Other games are being played that are Minecraft, and begin to construct our kind of critical conversation around those games. I think that's a really, really good and obvious starting point that doesn't tend to get done. And nuancing that to beyond, like you can talk about GTA, you can talk about representation, you can talk about violence, you can talk about racism, you can talk about all the kind of media literacy, right? But there's a whole strata of other games that are being played that could be baked into discussions about within English language or within geography or within, you know, economics or within. I think it's about reverse engineering some of the existing games into some of the key kind of learning outcomes. Because that's what it's about, right? Ultimately, if you're going to put it into the classroom, you need learning resources that map to learning outcomes. So when we can do that for Terraria, right, which I think we can, this is the thing we're kind of looking at the moment, then I think teachers have got, we can't expect teachers to suddenly be interested in this stuff. That's not fair any more than we can expect them to suddenly understand like how to do computer science, because that's what's happening now. Like it's not fair to put that burden on them. So I think the industry has to step up and be able to explain itself in terms other than marketing, and be able to explain like what's valuable and what's interesting about the work that is made. So developers are so important, and that trickles through into education. But it doesn't trickle through into education. It needs to be strategically put into curriculums by being linked to those outcomes. So I would start with English, or we're starting with English, because and sort of like because Twine, you know, because Shakespeare, because horror, because drama, because, you know, at the highest level, it speaks to many of the systems that video games already do, you know. RE could be tricky. So.
If you work within the arts organisations, you obviously do a lot with education, but do you have a crossover with the arts community in your area?
Yes, lots. So we work with the Arts Council a lot and the Wellcome Trust. We tend to be the people in between, like video games and some other bit of society, really. So quite often that's institutionalised, that's people like the Arts Council. We also work quite hard on creating collaborations between the artists. And I have some difficulty with this because there's a lot of people who make video games who already self-identify as artists, right? But for the purposes of this, you know, kind of everybody. Yeah, and bringing some of those skills together. And I think some of the sharing of what those skills could be and the kind of language of how games are made and how art is made are really, 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 really similar, if not the same. And we did a conference a few months ago about this. We were talking with Christina about it earlier on. And I think, you know, a lot of the problem with this is literally that games people and art people, like, they just drink in different bars. I mean, I don't mean that's really simplistic, really, but they graduate from different places.
How do we get them into the same bar? That's the question.
Well, things like this. You know, like the events like this and the festival that you're doing, and like the plurality of stuff that's happening here is like amazing. It's not like games over here. This is one collective, you know, set of collaborative, like bits of media and bits of art that all reference each other in really complicated ways. Or it seems really complicated, but actually if you just sort of relax, like it's not. Because like my 11-year-old gets, he's fairly relaxed about the whole, do you know what I mean? Like it's complicated to me, or to us, because it feels constructed, but it's so natural to many other folks. So I think it's that, and I think as people begin to graduate from art schools and make video games, as they are, absolutely, and the work that William's doing, is absolutely right. It's about having some demonstrators, some reference points to point to, hence we need to celebrate and show the people that are making this work. It's not about the games, it's about people who've made the things. You know, it's not about the games, it's about the people that make the games. And on that bombshell, thank you. We can stop now if you like. Thank you.